The American dream was never written into law. It was never guaranteed. But for most of the 20th century, it was real. A single income, a modest house, a driveway, a backyard, and the belief that if you worked hard, you could own the ground beneath your feet. That belief is now collapsing. Today, millions of Americans earn more than their parents ever did and still cannot afford a home. They save, they budget, they cut spending, and still the math doesn't work. This is not an accident. This is not bad luck. This is not simply the market. This was planned. To understand how housing in America became unaffordable, we have to rewind, not 10 years, not 20, but to the moment housing stopped being shelter and became a financial weapon. After World War II, America faced a problem it had never seen before: millions of returning soldiers and not enough homes. The solution was massive construction. The government backed mortgages. Banks were regulated. Zoning was loose. Homes were built fast and cheap. Between 1945 and 1973, home prices rose slowly, roughly in line with wages. A factory worker could buy a home. A teacher could buy a home. Even a grocery clerk could buy a home. Housing was treated as infrastructure. Like roads, like power lines, like schools. Then something changed. In the 1970s, inflation hit hard. Oil shocks, economic instability, and policymakers made a decision that would quietly reshape housing forever. They chose finance. Instead of protecting affordability, they protected asset values. Instead of building more, they restricted land. Instead of regulating banks, they unleashed them. Housing was no longer a place to live. It became a place to park wealth. By the 1980s, homes were being talked about less as shelter and more as investments. By the 1990s, they became speculative assets. By the 2000s, they became financial instruments. Mortgages were bundled. Debt was sold. Risk was hidden. And prices exploded. But here, the key truth most people miss. Even after the 2008 crash, when millions lost homes, the system did not reset. It doubled down. Wall Street learned something important in 2008. Housing was too important to fail. So instead of breaking the system, policymakers protected it. Banks were rescued. Investors were rewarded. Homeowners were sacrificed. And from the ashes of the crash, a new housing model was born. One where ownership would slowly disappear, and renting would become permanent. How the system was engineered against buyers. After 2008, America didn't just rebuild the housing market. It redesigned it. New rules made mortgages harder to get for ordinary buyers. Stricter credit requirements. Higher down payments. More documentation. At the same time, institutional investors were given cheap money. Private equity firms, hedge funds, real estate trusts. They could borrow billions at near-zero interest rates. And they did exactly one thing with it. They bought houses, entire neighborhoods, entire suburbs, entire cities. Homes that once belonged to families were converted into rental portfolios. Cash buyers outbid regular people. No inspections. No delays. A teacher competing against a billion-dollar fund never stood a chance. Then came zoning. Most American cities make it illegal to build anything other than single-family homes in large areas. No duplexes. No triplexes. No apartments. Land became scarce by design. Supply stopped growing. Demand didn't. And prices rose, not because homes got better, but because there weren't enough of them. Local governments resisted new construction. Homeowners fought density. "Not in my backyard" became public policy. Why? Because once housing becomes an investment, high prices are not a problem. They are the goal. Higher prices mean more equity. More equity means more borrowing. More borrowing fuels consumption. Consumption drives GDP. Politicians learned something dangerous. Rising home prices make voters feel richer, on paper. So they protected prices at all costs. Interest rates were kept low. Tax advantages rewarded ownership. Capital gains were shielded. Housing became America's largest wealth machine, but only if you already owned. For everyone else, it became a wall. Then came the pandemic. Trillions of dollars were injected into the economy. Interest rates dropped to historic lows. And once again, housing exploded. People who already owned homes watched their net worth soar. People who didn't were pushed further out. By 2022, the median home price had doubled in many areas, while wages barely moved. And when inflation hit, interest rates rose. This should have cooled the market. It didn't, because prices didn't fall fast enough to restore affordability. Monthly payments became even worse. Higher prices, higher rates, the worst of both worlds. For first-time buyers, the door slammed shut. Today, America faces a housing reality that would have been unthinkable decades ago. Homeownership is increasingly inherited, not earned. Wealth determines access more than work. And renting is no longer temporary, it's permanent. Young adults delay families, delay stability, delay roots. Entire generations are locked out. And yet the system continues because it benefits those in power. Banks profit from scarcity. Investors profit from rent. Local governments profit from rising property taxes. Existing homeowners profit from appreciation. The losers are invisible. The renters, the first-time buyers, the middle class. This is why solutions are resisted. Building more housing would lower prices. Lower prices would reduce equity. Reduced equity would threaten the illusion of endless growth. So construction remains slow. Zoning remains tight. And affordability remains out of reach. But systems built by policy can be changed by policy. Other countries build more. Other countries regulate speculation. Other countries treat housing as shelter first. America made a different choice. Not because it had to, but because it was profitable. Housing didn't become unaffordable overnight. It was engineered over decades. Quietly, legally, systematically. And until that truth is acknowledged, the American dream will remain exactly what it has become. A story people remember, not a future they can afford. There is a generation in America that did everything it was told to do and still lost. They went to school. They took on debt. They built careers. They delayed gratification. And when they finally reached the moment their parents once reached easily, the moment of buying a home, the door was already closed. Not slowly closing. Not partially shut. Locked. This wasn't because they failed. It was because the system changed the rules after the game had already started. For decades, homeownership was the primary way Americans built wealth. Not stocks. Not businesses. Homes. Equity grew quietly. Mortgage payments stayed stable. Inflation worked in the homeowner's favor. But when prices detached from wages, something fundamental broke. Homeownership stopped being a stepping stone. It became a gatekeeping mechanism. Those who bought early gained compounding advantages. Those who didn't were left chasing a moving target. Rent rose faster than wages. Saving became harder. Down payments moved further away every year. And then something darker happened. The narrative shifted. Instead of asking why homes were unaffordable, society began blaming the people who couldn't buy them. You should have bought earlier. You live in the wrong city. You drink too much coffee. These explanations were comforting because they avoided the truth. The truth is this: a system that requires perfect timing to succeed is not a fair system. Millennials entered the workforce during economic collapse. Gen Z entered during a housing bubble. Neither generation ever experienced a stable, affordable housing market. They were told to rent temporarily. But temporary became permanent. Corporate landlords replaced neighbors. Leases replaced deeds. Stability was replaced by uncertainty. And when ownership disappears, something else disappears with it. Control. Renters don't decide how long they stay. They don't control costs. They don't build equity. They are permanent customers in a system designed to extract, not empower. This wasn't a mistake. As wages stagnated, rent became the pressure valve. As productivity rose, housing absorbed the gains. Instead of sharing prosperity, the system concentrated it upward. And the consequences go far beyond real estate. People move less. Communities weaken. Birth rates fall. Economic risk increases. A nation that cannot house its working population securely is a nation quietly destabilizing itself. Yet the system continues because the pain is fragmented. One renter at a time. One family at a time. One rejected mortgage application at a time. There is no single collapse moment, just a slow erosion. And erosion is easy to ignore until there is nothing left to stand on. Every system has a limit, not a dramatic moment when everything collapses at once, but a threshold where pressure becomes impossible to ignore. America's housing system is approaching that line. For years, rising prices were justified by optimism, then by low interest rates, then by strong demand. But now, the justifications are running out. Home prices remain high. Interest rates are no longer low. Rents continue to climb. And the middle class, the group that once absorbed economic shocks, is thinning. What happens when the people who keep the economy running can no longer afford to live near their jobs? We are already seeing the answer. Teachers commuting hours. Nurses sharing apartments. Police officers priced out of the cities they protect. This is not a future scenario. It is happening now. Local governments try to patch the problem with subsidies, tax credits, down payment assistance. But subsidies do not fix scarcity. They push prices higher. Real solutions require something more difficult. They require lowering prices. And lowering prices is politically dangerous. Because housing is no longer just shelter. It is collateral. Trillions of dollars in loans depend on home values staying high. Pensions depend on real estate returns. Municipal budgets depend on property taxes. A serious drop in prices would ripple through the entire financial system. So policymakers hesitate. Instead of addressing the root, they manage the symptoms. They talk about supply shortages without changing zoning. They praise construction while blocking density. They promise affordability while protecting appreciation. The contradiction is obvious, yet rarely acknowledged. At the same time, investors are adjusting. Single-family rentals are no longer experiments. They are strategies. Homes are bundled, securitized, and traded. Rent becomes predictable cash flow. The more people are locked out of ownership, the more valuable renting becomes. This creates a feedback loop. High prices prevent buying. More renters increase demand. Higher demand justifies higher rents. Higher rents attract more investors. The system feeds on exclusion. But feedback loops always create pressure. Rent burdens rise beyond sustainability. Household debt increases. Defaults quietly grow. When people spend half their income on housing, they stop spending elsewhere. Economic growth slows. Political anger rises. History shows what happens next. Populism, polarization, blame. Housing shortages do not stay confined to housing. They leak into every part of society. And yet, the most powerful actors remain insulated. They own assets. They collect rent. They hedge risk. The breaking point will not arrive with a crash announcement on television. It will arrive slowly, when enough people decide the system no longer works for them. When homeownership stops being an aspiration and becomes a fantasy. When stability feels unreachable and trust begins to erode. That is the moment no policy paper can fix.